To the Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast. And today I have a special guest. I have Sil on, who was actually my online retreat guide. I recently completed a 9 day meditation retreat. And so I'm sure we're going to discuss a lot about that as well on this podcast. But thanks for coming on. And can you introduce yourself to the audience? And how did you get interested in Buddhism and meditation in general?
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me here. Um, well, my journey was a long one. I remember even as a child, I was already looking for something. And I had no clue what I was looking for, but it had to do with some kind of wisdom. It had to do with ethics somehow. And I was always searching. But as a child, we didn't have the internet. Yes, I'm that old. So it's not like you could Google your way around interesting religions or whatever. Um, I just knew, strangely enough, that I wanted to be a nun. And I was still, I don't know, 10 years old or something.
Mhm.
And I wasn't really raised in a religious way, but I was sent to a Catholic school. So I kept my eyes open to see what Christianity or Catholicism was all about. And it didn't really do anything. I found a lot of inconsistencies, and sometimes there seemed to be a lot of loving kindness in it, but other times it was also quite violent. And I felt like, yes, this is not it. And later on, I also started to looking in things like Hinduism, but all these gods, I felt like, no,
Mhm.
I don't think this is it. But over the years, I started to give up. As I said, there was no internet. I had no clue about other religions. And I started to raise my family, and always with a kind of empty feeling like I should have found something, but it didn't work out. One thing you should know about me is that I had severe depressions all of my life, two different kinds. Actually, it ran in the family and it was really, really bad. I mean, I was hospitalized, I had medication, I saw psychiatrists, and nothing really worked. And one psychiatrist said to me, well, with your family history, it is something that will always come back. It's just genes. You will have to deal with it. Um, and one day there was a new depression in full swing, and my sister came over from the UK, and she had said this over the years, like, you should meditate. And the years before, I was always like, nah, that's not me. I'm not that kind of person. I'm not spiritual. I'm a scientifically inclined person, analyzing. I'm not going to meditate. But this time, I really felt like I had hit rock bottom. I had tried everything. I tried to fight my way through depressions, and now I did not know what was left to do to get rid of these depressions. So again, she said, why don't you try to meditate? It might help a little bit. And I was like, well, okay, I tried everything else. Might as well try to do meditation. So she gave me a link, I think, to Jon Kabat-Zinn, who gave a talk to Google. Jon Kabat-Zinn was the person who initiated the mindfulness-based stress reduction, and he focused mainly on people with severe pain issues. And yes, his approach was really mindfulness. And in that Google Talk, he also gave a live demonstration of meditation. And I did that. And it was actually quite nice. So in the coming months, I practiced meditation. I read his books. But after a few months, I was like, where does this mindfulness come from? I don't think he invented it. So maybe I can trace back where it originated. Might be interesting. So I started to Google. Yes, we had the internet now. So I started to Google, and pretty soon I discovered that it came from Buddhism. And, you know, I had heard of Buddhism in the sense of, in my perspective, those were some old monks rocking back and forth all day in orange robes in the Himalayas, reading from some old scrolls and chanting. That was about it, what I thought I knew about Buddhism. And I had already decided, yeah, well, that's not me. But when I started to look on the internet to see where this mindfulness came from, I read a description of the Noble Eightfold Path. And I thought, wow, it had the wisdom, it had the ethics, and it had the meditation. And I thought, this might be it. And I started to read one sutta. It was a sutta called the Dart. It's in the Samyutta Nikaya. And in a nutshell, this sutta said, you can have bodily pain, but what you do with that is a choice. You can basically stub your toe and feel like, oh, I'm so embarrassed, and oh no, I have a game next week and I probably will not be able to join, and this is a disaster because it's my first important game, and blah, 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 and all this mental suffering will come up. But in this sutta it said, noble instructed disciples only feel a bodily feeling, and this was an insight. Because it basically said you have a choice to add mental suffering on top of it, or just accept, yes, it is a bodily feeling. You stub your toe, you check, does it need some medical assistance or not? You are careful with it, and you just move on without all this mental turmoil on top of it. And I thought, wow, this is from someone who apparently lived 2,600 years ago. And this sutta is instantly applicable, because it dawned on me that whatever bodily suffering I would experience, I had a choice. I could instantly apply it. So basically, that was it. I was sold. I really felt like this is what I was looking for. And the answers will be in the suttas, which are the Buddha's teachings about how to end suffering, all suffering. So that was great. But then I was looking for a teacher who could explain the practice, how to practice correctly. And I tried a tremendous amount of teachers. And with some of them, I stayed only a couple of months, and with others, a couple of years. I tried mindfulness practices, jhana practices, a whole lot of practices. And it was nice and it was interesting. But what I started to notice was that a lot of these teachers said they were teaching from the suttas, but actually they were not, because a lot of them were teaching from the commentaries which are comments about the suttas. And I had read the major commentaries, and some of them were in direct opposite of what the Buddha was teaching. So I felt, yes, well, the commentaries are sometimes very interesting and some of it is very good. But as for how to meditate, I thought, this is off, that is not correct. Or other teachers were quoting from the suttas. But when the teaching part of the sutta came, they stopped and started to add their own interpretation. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, well, yes, now we come to the important part of the sutta. Let's hear how you explain it. And they just stopped short of it and went on about their own teaching. And I felt, this is not correct. This is not, because I was reading the suttas and I thought, this is not what the Buddha meant. So at some point, I had this thought that I should try metta practice, loving kindness practice. I didn't really want to do that because honestly, I didn't like people all that much. I mean, there were some exceptions, but I really didn't like people all that much. Yeah. But I felt like I would need to practice loving kindness because I was quite harsh. I was quite easily irritated and things like that. So somehow I felt I should try to practice loving kindness, even if I don't want to. I think it would be good for me. So I tried some regular forms of metta meditation, but it felt, it didn't make me feel like I thought I was supposed to feel. It was more like a visualization exercise rather than truly feeling loving kindness for people. So in the end, I almost gave up. I had 5 years of all kinds of teachers, and they were all lacking in one thing or another, or they were not practicing the Eightfold Path, but more like a twofold path or threefold path. Uh-huh. So I was on the verge of giving up, but I thought to myself, I'm going to look for one more teacher. Mm-hmm. If I can't find a teacher that is actually teaching the suttas from how I understand it, I will start teaching myself. Mm. And that is when I saw on YouTube the videos from Bhante Vimalaramsi. Mm-hmm. He called it TWIM, Tranquil Wisdom Insight Meditation. Mm-hmm. And I listened to him. And he actually had the Majjhima Nikaya, which is a book with suttas, on his lap. And he was reading from it. Mm-hmm. And after every couple of sentences, he was actually explaining, it says this is what it means. Mm-hmm. And it was completely like I understood what the Buddha was explaining. So that was it. I started to practice TWIM. I never ever looked back. As a side note, ever since I became, well, it's just a label, but ever since I became interested in Buddhism, I never ever had one day of depression at all. Okay. And I had depressions all year round. Mm-hmm. So that was incredible. Mm-hmm. And that was because I started to learn about suffering and how actually the mind is creating its own suffering. And you have a choice to revel in this suffering and watch it, and it will become bigger and more intense, or to let it go. And TWIM was all about craving, how to let go of craving. Craving is the second noble truth, because the cause of suffering is craving. And what is craving? Craving is that you don't accept reality as it is right now. You always feel like life could be just a little bit better. If only the birds shut up behind me. Or if only I had this tasty meal instead of that meal. If only I could get that job. If only my wife or husband would stay with me. Or whatever it is, you always think life could be a little bit better. So you always want pleasant things, sense pleasures, and you want to push the unpleasant things away. Procrastination, or just ignoring things or trying to avoid it. And this is actually what causes suffering. And that is what the Buddha explained. And it was really quite eye-opening that Bhante Vimalaramsi noticed that, because all the other teachers were all about being in the present moment and seeing the impermanent nature of it. But none of them actually addressed craving in a practical manner. And Bhante Vimalaramsi did. He said, craving is, I like it, I want to get it, I want to keep it. Or I don't like it, I want to avoid it, I want to stay away from it. And it is both, it's both sides of the coin basically, but it's all taking things personally. You take everything personally. This is not just a child, no, it's my child. This is not just a house, no, it's my house. I make it cozy, I invest the money in it, I invest time in it, it's my house, it's special in some way. And Bhante Vimalaramsi was explaining all that. Not only that, he was actually adding right effort into the mix. So if you look at the description of the Eightfold Path, the meditation part is three things. It's right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness. What is right effort? It's basically seeing that the mind is in an unwholesome state and gently bringing it back to a wholesome state. So if you have hindrances, distractions, whatever they may be, the mind is in an unwholesome state. There is craving and clinging there. Clinging is the stories about why you like or dislike things. So Bhante Vimalaramsi was explaining all this, and he had a little mnemonic device, which are the 6 R's. And the 6 R's are basically just a way to practice right effort. Because if you look at the suttas, the Buddha says you should practice wakefulness every moment of every day. Unless you are asleep, you will practice wakefulness. And what is wakefulness? Purifying the mind of obstructive states, which is right effort. So in other words, you need to practice right effort all day long. You notice craving coming up. It takes practice, obviously, but you notice craving coming up and you gently let it go. And doing that takes mindfulness and right collectedness. And if you keep doing that, right mindfulness and right collectedness develop right alongside right effort. And if the mind is in a wholesome state, there is right mindfulness, there is right collectedness, and there is right effort. And you keep that going for as long as possible. So that is also jhana. And for a lot of teachers, jhana is focusing as hard as you can on the jhana to the exclusion of everything else. So you're only aware of the jhana. I've practiced this. It's very pleasant. and it can have all kinds of weird side effects, and it's fun, definitely. But what I noticed when I was doing these practices is that I didn't change at all. There was jhana, it was pleasant while it lasted. And when I stopped meditating, all the suffering came rushing back in. And I didn't change at all. I was still the same person. And when I started to practice like Bhante Vimalaramsi was practicing, suddenly I was addressing the craving because I learned to recognize it. I learned to understand what is craving and why should you let it go and how should you let it go. And pretty soon I was starting to notice changes. I was less irritated. I was becoming more patient and more friendly too, because I started to notice not only the suffering in myself, but also the suffering in other people and animals, other beings, let's say. And when you see that, you start to understand that if someone is angry at you, they are unhappy and they express this anger. But if they would be happy, they would not be angry in the first place. So that started to mellow my cold heart.
Oh, that's good.
Seeing the suffering in other people and understanding that it's not only about me, but other people all have suffering in their lives, whatever it may be. I mean, if you see a stranger in the street, you don't know anything about them. They may have just become a widow, or their child died, or they lost their jobs, or whatever it may be. You just don't know, but they all will have some kind of suffering in their lives.
Right.
So I kept practicing this, and I had periods where I felt stuck in the practice. But at some point, I really started to get it. I started to understand it. And when I really felt like, yes, I'm getting this practice, I understand what this is all about. I could start to explain it to other people, to newbies, in the practice, or in Buddhism, let's say. And I was a member of a Telegram support group, and I started to explain things to people in a bit of an approachable way. So using daily life examples and keeping it simple, let's say. And people seemed to like it. They had like, oh yes, now I get it. So a few years ago, I also encountered Delson Armstrong, who is a very advanced student of Bhante Vimalaramsi. Yes.
Of this book here.
This book.
Yeah.
And he was helping in Sutavada Foundation. That is a website, sutavada.foundation. And I joined there. Basically, I did transcripts of Delson's talks and stuff like that. And in the end, I was the editor of the book you just showed, Mindfulness, A Mind Without Craving.
Nice.
I edited the book. And I also started giving online retreats at Sutavada through Zoom. And after a while, David Johnson approached me from Dhammasukha, which is all about the twin meditation. Sutavada Foundation is also about twin meditation. It's the same practice. And David said to me, would you like to become a teacher, a guide to give online retreats? And I said, sure, I would love that. because basically I was already doing that. So I felt like, yeah, that will be nice. So I started, I did a training and started to teach there as well.
Mm.
So here we are.
Oh, yeah. I'm curious, how long from when you started the TWIM method until you became like an online retreat guide? How long of a period was that?
um, 4 years or something.
Okay, okay, interesting. You also
Yeah.
mentioned that like you got into the suttas, right? And that a lot of other teachers were not teaching based off the suttas. I think one thing about the suttas is it's so like if you look at the Pali Canon, it's like it depends
It's
on what version
huge.
you get. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's huge.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, some version, if you get like the Pali Canon Society's print, I think it's like it can be like a whole bookshelf of books. So I
Yeah.
think that for many people, it probably seems like
Daunting.
unapproachable. Yeah, yeah, unapproachable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like even consider like Western people who get into the Bible. Most Christians don't even read the Bible because
Yeah.
it's it's that big. But imagine that times
Yeah.
100 would be the Pali Canon basically.
Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah.
that's what keeps a lot of people back from like actually diving into it. You know, they don't know where to
Yeah.
start or it's just so big.
Yeah. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was a bit of a nerd. I started reading. Basically, there are 5 books in the Pali Canon, and each book is called a Nikaya.
Right.
And I haven't read them all because one book
Mm-hmm.
actually contains about 15 books,
Mm-hmm.
and they are not all translated in English just yet, or
Ah.
if they are,
Mm.
not very good.
Mm.
But most of them I have read by now,
Mm-hmm.
which is very useful because if people start to doubt what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
I can just tell them, well, read this sutta, it's all there.
Right.
So that is very useful.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it has a lot of interesting stories, and it's very interesting. But yes, you have to know that the Pali Canon initially was not written down.
Uh-huh.
It was an oral tradition where monastics recited these suttas to memorize them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next generation of monastics
Mm-hmm.
needed to learn them.
Mm-hmm.
So, because of that, there were a lot of repetitive phrases
Mm-hmm.
in the suttas,
Mm-hmm.
stock phrases, let's say.
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel like, yeah, it's a lot of repetition. Yeah, well, it made it easier to remember what the Buddha said. So it has a cause.
Mm-hmm.
But you can keep it simple. For instance, you also have, which is very famous, the Dhammapada.
Right. Right.
Here, I have a translation from Gil Fronsdal. It's really nice. It's a small book,
Mm-hmm.
and every verse is about 4 sentences.
Mm-hmm.
So you could say, I start that way.
Mm-hmm.
But Bhante Vimalaramsi and Delson Armstrong do a lot of Dhamma talks, and I myself too, Dhamma talks where they read a sutta and just explain it.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to struggle with the language, because you have people who will just say, well, it says this is this in the sutta, and it means basically this and that. And that's just a very approachable way to understand the Buddha's teachings.
Mm-hmm. The what's it called? The Majjhima Nikaya? Is that the one that's mostly read of? Yeah, because there's so many. There's like the long discourses. I think that's called in English the short discourses, right?
If you talk in English, you have the long discourses. That is the Digha Nikaya. Mm-hmm. You have the middle length discourses. That is the Majjhima Nikaya.
Okay.
You have the linked discourses. That is the Samyutta Nikaya. The linked discourses are by topic.
Mm.
So that is very useful when you want to learn about something specific. Then you can see all these suttas connected to a topic. And you have the Anguttara Nikaya, which are the numbered discourses. So when the Buddha is talking about 5 factors, you will find it in the book of fives within the Anguttara Nikaya. And you have the Khuddaka Nikaya, but that is basically sort of, well, we didn't know where to put this stuff. So let's make a book. And it's means the minor discourses, but it's actually the biggest book there is. But it's minor because the suttas are quite short. The Dhammapada is also in the Khuddaka Nikaya.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, just listen to someone explaining it and read it by yourself. And initially it will be hard. Because when you start practicing, a lot of it will not make sense. You are still feeling your way around what it's all about and things like that. But most people notice that when they have been practicing for, let's say, 6 months and they go back to that Dhamma talk or that sutta, they suddenly feel like, yes, that is what he was talking about. Now I understand. Right. So you are all along the way developing your own wisdom because you start seeing things for yourself within the meditation.
Okay, great. We did mention a lot about the TWIM method. And I mean, that's what I've been practicing, over the retreat, and then you've been mentioning it over and over again, but we didn't really clarify for the audience what it is, right? So maybe you can give us an explanation and also go over the 6 R's and how that's applied during meditation or during walking, even in daily life as well. So maybe you can share that.
Yeah, sure. So TWIM means tranquil wisdom insight meditation. It's just a way to explain to people that when you meditate, you have both the collectedness and the insights within one meditation, because a lot of teachers practice either mindfulness or they practice jhana, or they will tell you, you go into jhana, then you get out of jhana to become mindful, and then you get back into the jhana and things like that. But that is not what the Buddha was teaching. So it's just one meditation based on right effort, right collectedness, and right mindfulness, all at the same time. So what this means is that when you practice the 6 R's, it's just a way of telling you to do right effort. So the 6 R's are, the first is recognize. It's not something you really do, it's more that it happens, because either you recognize that you were fully distracted from your object of meditation. By the way, we practice loving kindness meditation, or actually the Brahma Viharas, so loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. They will arise by themselves. So that is the object of the meditation. So loving kindness is basically on top of the jhana. We don't pay attention to the jhana, but to the loving kindness. So the first step is you recognize, oops, I forgot to meditate. That is the first step. That is the recognize step. The next step is the release step. Release means nothing more than turning your attention away from the hindrance. Because a lot of teachers will tell you to label it. This is anger, or lust, or restlessness. Or you start to analyze, hey, where does this come from? No. You release your attention away from it, but not in an aversive way. It's fine that the hindrance is there, because they will teach you where your attachments are, but it's not your object of meditation. So you basically tell them, feel free to have a cup of tea, but my attention is going to go to something else, to something wholesome. So the next step is the relax step. Because when there is craving, and a distraction, a hindrance is craving, you will notice there will also always be some kind of tension there. a bit of tension in the mind, but also in the muscles. You clench up a little bit. You frown perhaps, or your jaws are a bit tight. So craving always goes along with a little bit of tension, which is basically the expression of the craving. So you need to relax that. You need to relax that craving. So if we tell people to relax the forehead, for instance, mind and body are very much intertwined. So if you relax your forehead, the mind will relax with it. Because if we were to tell people, relax the mind, then people would ask us, well, how do you relax the mind? But if we tell them, just relax a few muscles, the mind just goes with it. And if you do that correctly, you will notice that the craving is stopped and the mind becomes very clear and quiet, even for a split second. That is the relaxed step. After that, you re-smile. Re-smile is bringing up just a tiny little smile. It's not like a big Joker grin that your cheeks start to hurt. It's just a subtle little smile.
Right.
Why? Because it will make it easier to not take yourself so seriously and to bring up the metta again. So re-smile, and then you return to the loving kindness, which is the object of meditation. And then the mind is wholesome again. And you stay with that for as long as possible. Now, particularly when you first start meditating, people say, well, I had a terrible sit. It was awful. My mind was all over the place. It was just not a pleasant, relaxed meditation. But we tell them that is good, because every time you notice that and you forget you are meditating and you apply right effort, or the 6 R's, and you let that go and come back, it tells us that you are actually already very mindful. You are seeing the hindrances, because this practice is all about not focusing on the loving kindness or a jhana to the exclusion of everything else. The Buddha tried that and it didn't work. He said it doesn't lead to nibbana, and nibbana is just a different word for the end of all craving. So we have a very light jhana where you revolve around the metta, but open enough to see when a distraction comes up, which is good, because then you have an opportunity to let go of craving. Because the Buddha didn't say, just suppress all craving. He tried that. He tried it in certain meditations. He tried it physically by starving himself and all kinds of rigid ascetic practices. And it didn't work. Suppression doesn't work. But if you can notice it and just let it go and come back to the object of meditation every time, that is the way the Buddha explained the practice. Now, you can do this in sitting meditation, and over time, as you have noticed yourself, you will go deeper and deeper into the meditation by itself. It just naturally happens. But then you will start to notice that your personality will also start to change. Why? Because when craving is the cause of suffering and you let go of craving, you are basically interrupting what is called the links of dependent origination. So when you let go of craving, it can't move forward to develop into full-blown craving at some point in the future. So over time, not within a week, obviously, but over time, you will notice that there will be less suffering and you will be more equanimous. Equanimity is basically a balance of mind. The mind is very stable. It's like you have all these waves of life, of things happening, good or bad. and you are floating just above the waves. You still are fully in the midst of life, but the unpleasant things don't affect you as much. And you also don't get overly excited by the pleasant things,
Right.
which is also a lot of suffering involved there. I mean, if you are about to be married with the love of your life, it's fun, but there is also a lot of stress and excitement and all things to do and stuff like that. So you become more balanced. Like, yes, this is unpleasant, but it will pass away again. And there will just be a lot less suffering. And what does it mean to have less suffering? There will be more happiness because the mind will be more content and at ease. Or you are at work when you do this practice and you are working and suddenly this joy starts to arise out of nowhere. And those are all effects of letting go of all that suffering. So I haven't mentioned the sixth step, which is the return step. And that is basically just to keep doing the 6 R's when you are fully distracted. I mean, sometimes you will have some background thoughts, but you are still observing the loving kindness. But these background thoughts don't have much inner energy because there is no craving in them and they will just fade away. But at the point that you feel like, oh my God, I was completely forgetting I was meditating because I was planning my shopping later on. Then you practice the 6 R's and you come back to the loving kindness and you can keep doing that. However, it's not only sitting meditation, you can also do it while walking. And that is why we tell people also to do walking meditation. I mean, just 15, 20 minutes. I mean, you can do longer if you particularly like walking, but just practice this while walking. And why we do that is basically for a couple of reasons. First of all, the more you start to practice, the longer your meditation sits will be. It starts with half an hour, but it will gradually progress to 1 hour, 2 hours, even 3, 4, and longer. And you will need some physical exercise. You really need to stretch your legs if you have been sitting for a couple of hours. But also because it's a good way to start practicing in daily life as well. Because when you do walking meditation, and by the way, walking meditation is just walking at a normal pace. It's not lifting, moving, placing, or very slow walking. It's just walking. But you keep an eye on the mind. You keep radiating and you keep letting go of craving. But this is a good exercise to start doing this in daily life as well, because you learn to meditate while moving around. And the Buddha was always in jhana, not only when he was sitting, but also while he was walking, while he was talking. Because even when I'm talking with you and I notice some craving coming up for whatever reason, I can just let it go without you ever noticing I'm meditating. Well, actually, I am meditating in that instance. So you can do this all day long. And it will take some practice because people need to memorize what is the 6 R's and how to do them. And maybe you skip a step or you don't quite understand how to do it. That's fine. But over time, it will become very natural. And then it will just be like you are just already letting go and back to radiating loving kindness or whatever it is. So that is why Bhante Vimalaramsi always says, life is meditation, meditation is life, because you practice all day long.
Yeah, it's a very subtle process that can be kind of, it's like it can run in the background, like you said, when you're walking or as I mentioned to you several times, like waiting in line for something or
Yeah.
during a meeting or really, I mean, I'm not really sure when it could not be applied. Maybe there are certain times, maybe if it's like, I don't know, if you're flying an airplane or driving a car, maybe, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure when you couldn't
There
apply
are,
it.
well, people also do it while driving a car, but obviously
Uh-huh.
you should make sure that you don't end in a very deep state of meditation, but you
Right.
will be alert. And I venture to say that actually it might be safer driving
Mm,
because you are not distracted by all this papancha, this mental proliferation that is
right.
usually happening all day long.
Mm-hmm.
Because most people will be driving, but actually they are already at the meeting,
Mm-hmm.
or they are already thinking about the shopping they need to do later that day, or taking care of someone, or whatever it may be. They are not actually driving.
Mm-hmm.
But when you are meditating,
Mm-hmm.
your object of meditation may be the driving,
Mm-hmm.
or radiating loving kindness to all these people who are stressed behind the steering wheel, and
Mm-hmm.
just radiating. And
Sure.
when you notice craving, someone cuts you off and you get angry, and you notice, oh, maybe that's a good opportunity to let go of that anger.
Right.
So yeah, you can practice it, but it's a gradual process. I mean, if you do a retreat, we are not expecting people to be mindful all day long, and
Sure.
it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The 6 R's again, it's recognize, release, relax, re-smile, a return to the object of meditation, and then restart, right? Will be the last.
Repeat
Repeat.
whenever you, yeah, repeat whenever you get
Right.
distracted. So repeat the
Mm-hmm.
6 R's. Yeah.
Okay, just
Yeah.
to kind of cap that up. I was also another question I had for you is that a lot of people, depending on the method of meditation, they might achieve these sort of higher states, and um, I'm curious, what's your view on like stabilizing those states? As we kind of mentioned earlier, this is a practice that you can continuously do as you're walking. So, what are your views on like, you go through these different jhana states? What are your views on sort of stabilization? Because as you mentioned previously, you might have practiced some meditation and you achieve some sort of fantastic states, or you feel loving compassion in meditation, and then you go outside and your brain is scattered and you want to yell at people. I mean, that's not that uncommon, to be honest, right? So what is your view on like the stabilization of these sort of states that you achieve and attain?
Well, I'm not sure if you mean stabilization of jhanas or stabilization of practicing, remembering to practice. But I can address both.
Okay, maybe both. Go from both angles.
Yeah. Basically, when you do a retreat, you learn to sit, you learn to walk, and you learn to apply it in daily life. And after the retreat, depending on your daily life schedule, obviously, you can just continue. And then it will start to become second nature. So it will develop by itself. You might, put a Post-it next to your computer or your mirror to remind yourself to smile or whatever. That is fine. But over time, it will become natural, because over time, you will notice how unpleasant it actually feels to have this craving and clinging arise. It's very unpleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do this practice for quite some time, that distraction is like an alarm bell. It basically feels so unpleasant that you feel like, oh, wait a minute. I have options here. I have a tool. I can let it go and just return to radiating metta to you, or whatever you want to do. So it starts to become a second nature. You start to learn to gradually do it all the time. As for stabilization of jhanas, you don't. Because if you want to stabilize jhanas, it means you have a wrong view. Namely, you feel you are Well, you feel like you are in control.
Mm-hmm.
You can make things happen,
Mm-hmm.
but nothing works like that. I mean, sure, if you walk to the bus stop, usually you will get into the bus.
Mm-hmm.
So you feel like you are in control,
Mm-hmm.
but the bus might not come, or you might
Mm-hmm.
fall down the stairs and break a leg and you
Mm-hmm.
will not go there. So basically, you are never in control of anything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to sound grim, but it's like living on a sinkhole.
Uh-huh.
You feel like you know your life, you are in control of everything, you can just plan it.
Mm-hmm.
You know life, you know yourself, you can just plan everything.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, and sometimes that will happen, that sinkhole will just arise.
Mm-hmm.
Someone will get cancer,
Mm-hmm.
or you lose your job, or you get a divorce, and suddenly your life is nothing what it seemed like.
Mm-hmm.
And the meditation is basically the same. You can't control to radiate metta. It's more that you can set the intention, and over time, the mind becomes more wholesome. So it becomes more natural to start radiating metta.
Mm-hmm.
But you are not in control. You can't say, I want compassion right now. It's more like you can set the intention,
Mm-hmm.
and either it will come up, and over time, usually it will come up, or it doesn't come up. Sometimes the mind will say, loving kindness? Nope, not going to do that. I'm going to jump right to empathetic joy or equanimity or whatever. You might have noticed it for yourself. The mind starts skipping things.
Mm-hmm.
So over time, it stabilizes itself.
Mm-hmm.
But don't ever feel like you are in control.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like whatever happens in life, and whether it's thinking or saying things or doing things, you have a choice,
Mm-hmm.
a wholesome choice or an unwholesome choice.
Mm-hmm.
When people make unwholesome choices, for instance, there is a lot of boredom and then they will play video games because it feels nice. It's a sense pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
But it's unwholesome. Why? Because you are giving into craving, and at some point it will develop into suffering. Maybe not right now, might be next week or next month or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know, but it will develop into suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But if you make wholesome choices, for instance, it's not only about loving kindness or compassion, it might also be generosity.
Mm-hmm.
That is also very wholesome. I mean, it can be very wholesome. I mean, if I give you a gift,
Mm-hmm.
but actually I feel obligated to give it to you, I really wanted to spend it to something else, well, obviously that is not very wholesome.
Mm-hmm.
But if I want to give you something because I like you, you are a nice guy, and I feel like, well, he deserves something, here you go,
Mm-hmm.
that is a wholesome mind state as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are starting to practice all these wholesome mind states, the mind will become more and more wholesome by itself.
Mm-hmm.
So you are never in control, but the Buddha already said, what you think and ponder upon, that will be the inclination of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about race cars all day long
Uh-huh.
and you walk down the street, you will pay attention to cars. If you are an architect and you walk down the street, you will not look at cars probably, you will look at the buildings, what kind of buildings, from which building style, things like that, things you would change in when you would build and whatever. If you are an animal lover, you don't care about the buildings or cars. You see, oh, there's a cute little kitty down the street, let's pet them or whatever. So basically, when the mind inclines to the wholesome, you are weakening the unwholesome tendencies. You are strengthening wholesome tendencies. It doesn't mean you are in control, but it will become more natural because the mind is inclining that way already. Right. So if you are practicing this meditation your entire life and someone asks you, hey, can you steal that pack of gum in the store for me? It's like, are you crazy? I mean, I can buy it for you and give it for you. I'm not going to steal anything. That's really unwholesome. But if someone has a lot of unwholesome tendencies already, they feel like, oh, sure, they won't notice. Here you go. I mean, you always have a choice. Whatever you want to do or want to say, you have a choice. And initially it's pretty difficult because you already have certain tendencies, but when you do this practice, it will become more natural to have wholesome choices. But you are never in control. You can never say, let me strengthen this jhana, or let's make the loving kindness very strong. It doesn't need to be very strong. If there is a sincere intention to have loving kindness to your spiritual friend or to all beings, let it be whatever it is. There will be loving kindness there because it's sincere.
Right. Right. Yeah, I found myself, I guess the longer meditations that I did during the retreat, I guess the 6R process and as you mentioned, what would you say? It's almost like automatically leaning towards hopeful state of mind or towards that process. So as I go about my day, it's more of a remembrance to continue the practice. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
It's more like, it's sort of like going on, like automatically running it versus like, when you're driving a car, like a stick shift car, and it's like such a struggle to go to the next gear and then, and more of a smooth, like driving a nice smooth automatic BMW versus an old, you're jumping around.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's what I found. My experience.
You don't make it happen. It happens by itself. But if you have a lot of craving, I want this metta to be really strong. There is craving. I mean, there is the wish to have strong metta. And first of all, the metta will not become stronger because there is craving, and metta is a wholesome state. It's a selfless state. If there is some kind of wish there is no true metta there anymore. It might be a pleasant feeling, but it's not true metta because you can't both wish sincerely people to have a life free from suffering while simultaneously thinking, I want this really strong feeling. It just happens by itself. But wholesome mind states, and over time you will really clearly start to notice it, are way more pleasant. And the mind feels like, oh, this craving is quite unpleasant. Let's go back to the metta. Let's let go of the craving and just return to this pleasant wish for all beings to be happy. It just feels nice.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Well, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I finished the 9-day retreat very recently. And so maybe you can share a little bit about the retreat itself. How is it conducted? And for the listeners, maybe somebody's listening, they might be interested in joining one of these retreats. And then as a side question, I guess just out of my curiosity, I was wondering, what are some common, since you've led several retreats, right? What are some common like progression points and common pitfalls? And of course, it's going to be different for everybody, but at the same time, I'm sure there's a degree of commonality between, things that are holding people back, maybe, I don't know, excuses or this and that, distractions, hindrances, and then also like common points of progression on the retreat too.
Yeah. So we get, well, let's start with the beginning. We conduct online retreats all year long at dhammasuka.org. There you can sign up. There are a lot of guides. You will see a webpage with all the guides who introduce themselves, and they are all certified guides. And you can just say, I want to do a retreat in September, and let's see who will give a retreat in September, and maybe this guide would be nice, and you can sign up. They are free. But Dana based. I mean, it would be nice if you could say, well, I really enjoyed this retreat. Let's give some Dana. But we also have people who are very poor, and that's fine. I mean, they can just do the retreat. At Dhammasukha, usually, but it will change a bit, I think. Usually they are through forms. And basically the requirements for when you start to do a retreat are twice a day, half an hour of sitting practice. You do once or twice walking meditation, and every day you listen to a Dhamma talk where Bhante or Delson explain certain suttas, and at an increasing difficulty. So initially, Bhante will explain how to do the practice, but gradually on, at the end of the retreat, he will go into what is dependent origination and how does it work, and can you recognize that in your life and whatever. So basically, you start to join a retreat, you read a booklet that explains the practice, and then every day you will fill in a form with questions like, what was your best sit? Did you smile during the day? What were the problems you ran into? What were some noticeable things that happened for you? You can ask questions. And they send it to that guide, and that guide will read it and will answer back. Some of them quite concise. I tend to write some longer answers to explain things, as you might have noticed. And you do that every day. And I will not mention them all, but I will get into it a little bit. But there are certain points of progression where you notice that people are progressing. And then at a certain point, the guide will say, well, it's clear that they really get how to do it, and they are ready for the next set of instructions. Because initially, everyone starts out with practicing with one spiritual friend. So you radiate 10 minutes to yourself, which is also not always easy for people, because a lot of people hate themselves, but you will learn to radiate to yourself, and after that 20 minutes to a spiritual friend you will pick.
And
so
we see. Oh, sorry to interrupt. There are. I mean, I didn't need to do this, but there are. There's like a separate meditation or instructions for people who have. It's like a forgiveness meditation, right? For people who have a little bit of self-hate or things along those lines. There's another. Another set of instructions too, right?
Yes, but the requirement is that they first need to do a 6-hour retreat, because they will need to understand how to do the regular 6 hours, because the forgiveness practice in some ways it's the same, but in other ways it's very different. It's a very verbalizing practice. So you, in the forgiveness practice, you stay within the first jhana, while the regular practice leads through all the 8 jhanas and beyond. But yes, there are so many people who feel a real blockage of loving kindness. They try to, but it just doesn't work. And most of the time it is because maybe they didn't have a very pleasant childhood, and they have no clue what loving kindness is. or they have PTSD or whatever, and all kinds of traumas. And in that case, we will tell people, well, we think it might be better for you to do a forgiveness retreat or to practice forgiveness on your own. We also have the instructions for that. And what happens is some people only need to do forgiveness for a couple of days. Mm-hmm. But there are also people who need to do it for weeks or months. And I know a few people who have even done it for a couple of years, mm-hmm. because they just needed it. And most of the time when they do that, and they keep forgiving whoever needs to be forgiven, themselves included, at a certain point, they feel like there's nothing left to forgive. Mm. I feel like I have truly forgiven myself or truly forgiven certain people. I feel like I'm done. And often that goes along with a huge sense of relief. It's really a huge relief that they will feel. And then they know they are done, and then they can return to the regular 6-hour practice. And usually they will just zoom along because they have cleared the roadblocks. And they are so happy, and it's just suddenly very easy to radiate loving kindness to themselves or to other people. And it's really beautiful to see that.
Oh, very good. Okay. So also, yeah, as the retreat, basically, as you mentioned, you watch a Dharma talk. Well, first you sign up, and then there's certain guides doing it at different times of the year. And then you watch a Dharma talk every day. And as you mentioned, you actually mentioned that it's a minimal of 30 minutes, 2 sitting sessions of 30 minutes, but it's encouraged as the program goes on, as the retreat goes on, to try to extend it a little longer and a little longer and a little longer.
Yeah.
I was wondering, like, what are the common pitfalls you see? Because for me, I felt like my pitfall was making excuses that I couldn't go longer. I mean, eventually I did get to 90 minutes, which is decent, probably, you know. And nonetheless, it's like, oh, I did an hour. Okay, that's like you really can go an hour 15, an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours if you have the time as well, right?
Yeah.
But for me, I noticed like the pitfall is sort of, it's that excuse, or I don't know what you'd call it, but it's sort of like, enough, it's enough.
Yeah.
You know? So is that a common thing you see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, the reason why we encourage people to sit longer is because the mind will keep calming down more and more and more. It will just continue. And when you sit longer, the mind usually will go to the deeper jhanas. So basically, what are we doing in the meditation? You keep letting go. Because of that, the mind calms down. At a certain point, the coarse hindrances will start to disappear. There will still be hindrances there, but they become increasingly more subtle. You keep 6-houring, but the mind keeps calming down more and more and more. And at a certain point, it will be quiet for long periods of time. I mean, 30 minutes of nothing going on, just utterly quiet. And then maybe a little vibration comes up, you let go, and it's quiet again. And at a certain point, the mind will just stop. Cessation. And after that, nibbana can happen. Not always. Sometimes there will be a cessation, but no nibbana will happen. I will not really go into that, but that is the end goal of the practice. And what we have noticed is that it usually happens for people when they sit for 3-4 hours at a time. Of course, we know that people doing an online retreat also have a daily life. They have a family or a job or whatever. So we will not ask them to sit for 3-4 hours. Some of them we do, because some of them have the time and they love to sit and whatever, so we encourage it. But that is the end goal, and we want you to experience in that online retreat as much as possible, because with the deeper jhanas, some big insights will arise. You will start to see the impersonal nature for yourself. You will start to see how you are not in control. Things arise and pass away on their own. You will start to see all that. And we want you to experience all that. Mm. And also, when you sit longer, I mean, for a couple of hours or whatever, time will start to change within the meditation. I mean, you can sit for 2.5 hours and you feel like, well, I think I'm done here. And you thought it was only an hour or an hour and a half, but basically you sat for 2.5 hours. So time will start to change and it will become less of a chore to sit that long. It will be very pleasant. So that is why we encourage people to sit as long as possible. But you're right, people are often very resistant. Why? Because they think it will always be like in the first half hour or hour of practice. Very busy and a lot of distractions going on and things like that. And they feel like, well, 2 hours of that, no, thank you. But we know that the mind will calm down so much. And there will be so much relief in there, in that very quiet mind. And we know what can happen. Right. So that is why we keep nagging people a little bit. I mean, I'm a gentleman. I will tell people, tell yourself, well, how about if I sit 5 or 10 minutes longer? Right. But Bhante Vimalaramsi often says, okay, tomorrow you will sit for an hour longer. Period. And you see people paling a little bit, like an hour longer, and they say, okay. And often they will do that. But I feel like, well, it's a bit harsh. I rather have that the practice grows a bit more naturally. But yeah, some guides are a bit more rigorous and some are more gentle, but it doesn't matter. This is why we want you to sit for as long as possible. We want you to experience all kinds of insights and the pleasure of a long sit, of that utterly quiet mind and no distractions for a long time. It's really, the mind will start to learn that there is hardly any suffering left in these deep states. So yeah, so that is a pitfall. Another pitfall is that people get bored, because a lot of people are actually doing this because they want to experience Nibbana. But wanting to experience Nibbana is, you guessed it, a form of craving. Right. And they think they do, but they are not really doing the practice. They are just waiting. They are just sitting with expectations like, Nibbana can happen any second now. I'm ready for it. Well, it will never happen. So if you are only waiting for Nibbana and nothing ever happens, the sit becomes very unpleasant and very boring, because you are just waiting. Waiting is not fun.
You have these expectations.
It's just,
yeah. Right.
So a lot of people will tell me, I'm so bored. And then I will address, well, maybe are you doing the actual practice, or are you actually having expectations, and are you waiting for Nibbana to happen? But Nibbana can only happen when there is no craving. If you are waiting for it to happen, it can't happen. Right. It just blocks it. You are shooting yourself in the foot. Right. It's like It's like wanting to climb an icy mountain while tying yourself to a chair.
Right,
It
right,
just can't happen.
right. Well,
So I will address that.
mhm,
And I will also tell them, well, hopefully you will not only practice to experience Nibbana.
mhm,
So reflect on, why are you doing this?
mhm,
Maybe you want to become a better person, a more wholesome person. Maybe you want to have more happiness in your life and less suffering. So reflect on these kinds of things
mhm.
instead of just waiting for Nibbana to happen, because yes, that is very boring because it will never happen. So that is also a common pitfall.
Mm,
Another common pitfall is that people think they are doing the 6 R's, but they are actually not doing it.
mm,
So we have a question in the forum to people to describe to us, how do you do the 6 R's?
mm,
And it's one of the most important questions, because here it is that we see, oh, people are skipping steps,
mhm,
or they are not really doing the relax step, which is crucial to let go of that distraction.
mhm,
So that is some people need days to start to understand the 6 R's.
mhm.
And when they don't really do the 6 R's, nothing is changing. And that is very unpleasant, because they keep suppressing hindrances instead of recognizing and letting them go. And then, yes, they don't feel like they have any benefit from the meditation,
Mm,
because they are not really doing the meditation, but they think they are.
mm,
Another pitfall is that a lot of people have done Vipassana, so they tend to pay attention to the breath instead of loving kindness. So that is also a common pitfall. And then we have to make sure that people have the correct object of meditation,
mm.
or they pay attention to jhana factors instead of the loving kindness. So, yeah, there are a lot of common pitfalls,
Mhm,
but we keep an eye out for them,
mhm,
and uh, we read the forms carefully to see,
mhm.
hey, are they really doing the practice, or do we need to tweak a little bit here and there? I
Right.
mean, we are not teachers that are giving you grades. I mean, we don't expect you to have perfect meditations,
Mhm,
but we just want to give you a little nudge here or there, because the TWIM is not only the meditation, it's the entire Eightfold Path. So we also ask people to keep at least 5 precepts.
mhm,
So not stealing and not killing spiders or whatever it may be.
mhm,
This is part and parcel of the practice as well. So we keep an eye out. Do they follow the entire Eightfold Path? Or do they need a little nudge here or there? And I mean, I consider myself more like a Dhamma friend
uh-huh.
who will see when they are trailing off the path, and I will gently get them back onto the path and explain to them
Mhm,
how and why. That is all we are doing.
mhm.
And why? Because it's great fun as a guide when you notice that these people are starting to have fun with the meditation,
Mm,
are starting to get it,
mm,
are, I mean, they suddenly say to me, like, I had this joy and I've never experienced this kind of joy. It was so beautiful.
mhm,
And we are like, oh, yes, they are really getting it. They are
mhm,
getting into the practice, and they are starting to experience less suffering,
mhm.
because that is my end goal as a, as a guide
Right.
for other people to experience what I have experienced myself,
Mhm,
that it is just a beautiful practice, and it is fun, and it is pleasant,
mhm.
and it's like a game. It's like a video game of letting go of all these hindrances. And then you have this calm, pleasant, wholesome mind for a little bit, and then
Right.
distractions arises and you let them go again.
Yeah.
And it's like a game.
Yeah, definitely.
So don't take yourself too seriously. See it as a game. Just spotting the hindrances, letting them go.
And that's why I think that, as you mentioned, it's like a game. It's sort of like if you cut the meditations early, say 30 minutes, 40 minutes, instead of going longer, like an hour, hour and a half. It's sort of like if you're playing a sport, you know, if you're a basketball player or soccer player, you start with the warm up, you know, you pass the other player, got to get your joints going, right? But if you quit at the warm up, you didn't even get to the game yet, right? It's sort of like, I think a lot of people in meditation in general, they'll stop at the warm up. Like right when you stop is right when it actually is really starting, if that makes any sense.
Yes. That is a beautiful simile. I will use it for future retreats because that explains it perfectly. They are getting stuck in the warm up while the actual work, the actual insights and things like that will still need to develop, and it takes time. You know, the mind is a thinking machine. That's not bad. It's what the mind is evolved to do, to think, to keep us from harm, to bring us to the good stuff, whatever. The mind thinks. And so it's not bad to think, but when you keep letting go of distractions, the mind will start to calm down. And it's actually very pleasant. And that is why I said, initially the mind is all over the place, maybe for the full 30 minutes. And when you think that a meditation sit of 2 hours will be just like that, yeah, for sure, people will not want to meditate for longer because they feel like, well, 30 minutes is more than enough for me. But we know that the mind calms down and calms down and more until it calms down so much, like you have never experienced ever in your life, that the mind can be without thinking for such long periods of time. It's a relief. It's a big relief to experience that. It's very pleasant.
No, most definitely. All right. Well, actually, I got to get running, but thanks a lot for joining me today. And maybe to end the podcast, we can you can help inform the listeners. Where can people find out more about these teachings? Are there any resources, websites that you would recommend? And I can include all the links in the show notes as well. So maybe you can share a few resources and links.
Yeah. I can send them to you. A lot of information is also on dhammasuka.org and suttavada.foundation, but currently they are not giving online retreats there, but there is still a lot of information on both websites. So and we also have weekly meetings where we sit first for an hour, and then afterwards we discuss a sutta, and usually that leads to discussing our practice or things in daily life or the precepts or whatever. We also have support groups where people can ask questions or just tell each other about some daily life stuff and things like that. So yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll include that in the show notes. And I'm actually halfway through Delson's book, which you edited. So I definitely recommend this. This is another good resource. There's another one called The Path to Nibbana as well, right?
Yeah. Well, a mind without craving is quite complicated. So if you are just starting out, I think it might be better to start with Path to Nibbana, for instance, from David Johnson. Or just listen to Bhante Vimalaramsi's Dhamma Talks. I will send the link to his channel. Just listen to it and see what you think of it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming on, and I really appreciate it. I'll include all the links in the show notes. And until next time.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. And also, hold on one second.